There are some books that just burrow into your mind and, well, they don't leave.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, and I bet for a lot of you listening, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment is definitely one of them. It just plunges you right into the mind of Rodion Raskolnikov.
Oh, absolutely. This student grappling with, just grinding poverty, but also this incredibly radical and terrifying idea.
Exactly. And the genius of it isn't just the whodunit part, right?
Not at all. It's how Dostoevsky just peels back the layers of this guy's mind. He puts
Yeah.
him under this immense psychological pressure, and we get to watch.
So this deep dive is really for you, focusing specifically on Raskolnikov's headspace, his psychology, and how it's all tangled up with what was happening in Russia back then.
Yeah, 19th century Russia, a time of huge change. We've looked at literary analysis, some psychological perspectives, historical context, all that good stuff.
Think of it as your way to really get a grasp on Raskolnikov, why he does what he does, and what it says about his world, without, having to read a stack of academic papers. You'll get those aha moments.
Hopefully. It's a shortcut to being well informed on these themes.
Okay, so let's paint the picture. St. Petersburg, mid-1800s. What's it like?
Well, it's crucial to understand it's not some static old world Russia. It's a city and a society in massive transition. Western ideas are flooding in, kind of shaping things up.
So modernization, but maybe not smooth sailing for everyone.
Definitely not. You've got this growing divide, incredible poverty right next to wealth. The old traditions are fading, but the new ways haven't quite settled yet, especially for the poor.
And intellectually.
Oh, it's buzzing. People are debating everything. Russian identity, morality, what it means to be human. Think Rousseau, Western philosophy hitting this very different Russian reality. It's a real ferment of ideas.
Right, so that's the backdrop. Intense. And into this steps Raskolnikov. What's his initial motivation? What kicks this whole thing off?
Poverty first and foremost. Real crushing poverty. He's had to drop out of university. He feels trapped, humiliated.
That desperation must be overwhelming.
It is. And it fuels this theory he develops about certain extraordinary people.
Yes, the Superman idea, almost.
Kind of. He convinces himself that these special individuals are actually allowed to break society's rules, even commit crimes, if it's for some larger purpose or greater good down the line.
And the murder of the pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna. That's the test.
Exactly. It's not just about the money, though he needs it desperately. It's this twisted experiment. Am I one of the extraordinary ones? Can I step over this line? It's horrifying.
The theory is one thing, reality is another. How does he actually cope after he does it?
Oh, it hits him like a ton of bricks. Almost immediately.
So the rationalization just evaporates.
Pretty much. That intellectual justification he built, it just shatters against the raw force of his own guilt and anguish. The psychological fallout is immediate and intense. His mind starts to unravel.
It's like he despises his own human reaction.
Yeah.
The guilt, the fear.
Totally. He sees emotions as a weakness, something holding him back from being this extraordinary man he wants to be. He actively tries to suppress everything, to become cold and detached.
But does he manage it?
Not really. That's the fascinating part. You see these little flickers of empathy, of pity for others, even acts of generosity. But even those feel somehow distant. Like he's observing suffering, not truly connecting. It's all filtered through this alienation.
And this core idea, the ordinary versus extraordinary, that's really the engine driving him, isn't it?
It's absolutely central. He needs to prove to himself that he belongs in that higher category, the one that isn't bound by conventional morality. The murder is the ultimate proof, or so he thinks.
But his own mind rebels. The conscience kicks in.
Hard. He just can't maintain that composure, that intellectual distance he craves. His nerves fray, he gets sick, he makes mistakes. It demonstrates the sheer power of the conscience, the very human part he's trying to deny. The internal torment becomes unbearable.
So there's no escaping his own humanity.
None at all. And eventually that leads towards, well, not exactly a happy ending, but a transformation.
Tell us about that. How does he start to change?
It's a long, painful process, but it involves confronting what he did, accepting his guilt, and crucially, connecting with another person.
Sonia Marmeladova.
Yes, Sonia. She becomes his moral anchor, in a way. Through her suffering, her faith, and her compassion, he starts to see a path back. Confession, accepting punishment, and slowly, slowly beginning to embrace his human nature again. Finding a kind of internal quiet. eventually.
That's interesting. One source we looked at suggested thinking about his personality even before the crime.
Right, that was an interesting angle. It proposed looking at him as perhaps naturally shy, introverted, maybe even having what modern psychology might term schizotypal features.
Meaning?
Things like significant social anxiety, discomfort in relationships, maybe some eccentric beliefs or ways of thinking, a tendency towards isolation. It's just a lens, of course, not a diagnosis.
But it potentially adds another dimension to his alienation and that intense inner world he lives in.
It could, yeah. It might help explain some of his detachment.
And we absolutely cannot separate him from his environment, can we?
No way. The poverty, the social inequality of St. Petersburg, that's not just wallpaper. It actively shapes his thinking, his desperation, his mental state. It creates the conditions where such a radical, terrible idea could even take root. That sense of hopelessness is palpable.
So Dostoevsky isn't just writing a psychological thriller, he's also providing social commentary.
Absolutely. He's diving deep into big questions. Moral responsibility, the psychological cost of guilt. You see Raskolnikov's mind almost fragmenting under the strain of trying to reconcile his actions with his conscience.
And the motivations for the crime itself are so layered.
Oh, incredibly. It's not just one thing. You've got this mix of nihilistic ideas he's picked up, his own wounded pride and arrogance, deep existential angst, raw economic need, and this desperate desire to prove himself, to be seen as special. It's a potent cocktail.
But it's not all bleak, is it? You mentioned Sonia, redemption.
No, it's not entirely bleak. That's key. Amidst all the darkness, there's this persistent theme of atonement, of finding a way back through suffering and human connection. Sonia's unwavering faith is central to that. It suggests redemption is possible even after such a transgression, but it requires genuine contrition, self-sacrifice.
Dostoevsky's ability to portray that inner world feels so real, even today.
His psychological realism is just masterful. He understood the intricate dance between literature, society, and the human mind like few others. You feel like you're right there inside Raskolnikov's head.
And this was all happening against that specific historical backdrop we touched on earlier.
Exactly. You had the Tsar, Nicholas I, running a very autocratic conservative regime, lots of simmering discontent. Serfdom was still a massive issue, creating huge inequality.
And those intellectual debates were raging.
Yes, the clash between traditional Russian values and those Western ideas, rationalism, socialism, nihilism. Intellectuals were fiercely debating Russia's path forward.
Dostoevsky himself had personal experience with the harsh realities of the time, didn't he?
Profoundly so. His arrest, mock execution, and years of hard labor in Siberia for being part of a radical intellectual group. That experience shaped him immensely. It gave him a deep understanding of suffering, faith, and the complexities of the human soul. You feel that lived experience in the novel.
So Crime and Punishment really holds up a mirror to its time.
Without a doubt. It reflects the anxieties of this transitional period, the social unrest, the class conflict, the economic turmoil, the feeling that maybe the government didn't care about the immense suffering. There was even, apparently, a noticeable rise in violent crime around that time, which likely fed into the narrative too.
How does Dostoevsky technically pull us so deep into Raskolnikov's psyche, the way he tells the story?
Yeah, the narrative technique is crucial. He mainly uses what's called third-person restricted omniscient perspective. Basically, we're seeing the world over Raskolnikov's shoulder, hearing his thoughts, feeling his anxieties. We're locked in his perspective for most of it.
That definitely creates intensity. And the symbolism is powerful too, right?
Yeah, very. Think about water often linked to cleansing or rebirth, or the state of rooms or nature reflecting inner states. Even clothing.
Clothing. How so?
Well, Sonia's simple, almost ragged clothes speak to her poverty, but also maybe her purity, contrasting with Raskolnikov's own increasingly disheveled look as he unravels. And the overcoat he wears during the crime becomes this loaded symbol, too. These details aren't just decoration, they add layers of meaning.
I remember reading it and feeling disoriented by time, like things would speed up or slow down wildly.
Yes. He totally manipulates time to match Raskolnikov's mental state. Time seems to crawl during moments of high tension or guilt, then race during frantic periods. He uses flashbacks, dreams, sudden shifts. It mirrors that internal chaos and keeps you, the reader, off balance.
It really immerses you in his turmoil.
And the overall structure contributes too. It feels episodic sometimes, with these intense peaks and valleys of action and introspection and recurring images or ideas that keep circling back. It builds that psychological tension.
It's fascinating how it connects with philosophical ideas that came later, like existentialism.
It does resonate, doesn't it? Ideas about individual freedom, choice, creating meaning, they're certainly there. But Dostoevsky's focus is maybe less on the pure creation of meaning and more on the psychological and moral consequences of those choices, rooted often in a spiritual context. It's a slightly different flavor than, say, Sartre.
We also came across this concept of ego transcendence in relation to Raskolnikov.
Yeah, that's an interesting lens. His whole extraordinary man theory is a kind of flawed attempt at transcending ordinary limits, achieving a supposed higher awareness. He thinks suffering might even be part of that. But Dostoevsky shows how this kind of ego-driven transcendence leads to isolation and deeper suffering, not enlightenment.
And the idea of different kinds of suffering seen through a prism of the divine.
Right. The analysis suggested suffering can come from recognizing your sin, from empathy, greed, lack of faith, pride, the inability to love. Raskolnikov experiences several of these, especially the suffering that comes from his own actions and his eventual connection to Sonia's suffering. It's all part of his painful journey towards recognizing his place within humanity.
It always comes back to that internal split in him, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That core conflict. His intellect pushing this power cult idea, the superior individual.
Versus his gut reactions, his emotions, his conscience.
Exactly. The one analysis called the child cult, the innate human responses, vulnerability, the need for connection. His name, Raskolnikov, even comes from the Russian word raskalat, meaning split or divided. It's right there in his name.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this up, if you had to give us the main takeaway from looking at Raskolnikov's psyche and his society together.
I'd say the crucial insight is that you can't really separate the two. Crime and Punishment is this incredibly deep dive into one man's mind, yes. But that mind is profoundly shaped by the pressures, the ideas, the inequalities of 19th century Russia. His struggle with guilt, his alienation, his dangerous ideology. It's a timeless story about morality and redemption, but it's also deeply rooted in its specific time and place.
And why does it still hit so hard today? Why should you care about this story from 150 years ago?
Because his core struggles are still ours, aren't they? We still wrestle with social inequality and its psychological effects. We still battle our own inner conflicts between ambition and conscience, detachment and empathy. We're still searching for meaning, for purpose. The novel asks questions about justice, morality, and human nature that are just as relevant now.
It definitely leaves you thinking. Here's something to chew on. How much do our own societal structures, our media, our dominant ideologies today shape our psychology, our sense of right and wrong? Is that line Raskolnikov tried to draw between the ordinary and extraordinary? Does it still exist in subtle ways in our own thinking? Lots to ponder there. Thanks for diving deep with us on this one.